It's curious, very, very odd, and yet nobody realizes it, that human beings are brought up to feel as if they were strangers in the world. We are given a sense of our own existence that is in flat contradiction to the facts of nature. Although, in its own way, there is something natural about that, because nothing can happen at all that is not in some way connected with an elaborate scheme, not a scheme that, as it were, had a plan in mind, but nevertheless a scheme that is musical in its nature. And even our delusions are part of that. But nevertheless, they are sometimes extraordinarily odd, and we are given by our society, by our tradition and upbringing, by our culture, a very weird sensation of our own existence. And that is the sensation of strangeness, of being somebody who, as we say, comes into this world, whereas when you are born, you should say that you came out of this world. You don't come into it. Where else is there to come from? In the philosophy that we've inherited, however, and that underlies our common sense, there are some ideas which account for this sensation of strangeness. And I'm going to spend the first session examining the history of that. But what I want to say, to make things clear from the outset, especially to those of you who are strangers to these seminars, is that, strictly speaking, that which you feel most inwardly and intimately to be yourself, is obviously part and parcel of the works. We might say the plays, but what there is, we could say in a slangy way, the witch than which there is no witcher. The Hindus say tatvamasi, which is in Sanskrit saying that thou art. You're it. Only you're playing you aren't. And that's what it was always doing. But basically, never fear. What is absolutely central and fundamental to you is what the Christians might call God or the Godhead, and you're pretending you aren't. And you're pretending very cleverly, so that the illusion is extraordinarily convincing. Or if we put it in terms that do not require these, what we today call mythological concepts of God or Brahman or whatever, we can simply say that every individual is what the total cosmos is doing at a place called here and now, or a place called I. I is a pronoun of position, like this, here, so on. And so that's the way things actually work. And anyone can see it, and it can be proved to the satisfaction of anybody by purely physical evidence. Only we are trained to feel the exact opposite, you see, that we are little creatures sort of looking over our shoulders and wondering where the hell we are and what's going to happen next, and that this isn't our arrangement at all, and that we're caught in a great cosmic trap. O thou who didst with pitfall and with gin beset the road I was to wander in. You know, that kind of idea. Now, what accounts for this? How could we possibly have come to feel this way? Well, there are a lot of reasons, but the two that I want to concentrate on this morning are two mythologies that have influenced everybody's thinking in the Western world. The first we'll call the Jewish-Christian mythology, and the second, the Newtonian mythology, or mechanistic mythology. And the latter, of course, has a far more dominant influence on educated people today than the other one. But let's look and see what they really involved in our feelings about the world and about our place in it. First of all, in the Jewish-Christian mythology, we are here in a relationship to the ultimate reality, which is comparable to the relationship between a great king and his subjects. This king is modeled on the ideal type of a great Near Eastern king who might have lived, say, around 4 or 3,000 BC. You remember, don't you, in reading about the fact that when those kings died, all their families and servants and many of their subjects were buried with them. They were killed outright by being, buried alive in the royal tomb. And Thomas Mann made the observation that in those days it seemed as if human heads had no backs to them, as if one were simply a mask, and that what was behind you was something altogether beyond you, so that you were completely identified with your tribe, with your human family. And so the king was like a queen bee, we would say the kingpin upon which everything depends. And when that's blown out, everybody collapses with it. Only later did we grow backs to our skulls and then begin to feel enclosed. That was a very important step, but a troublesome one. We don't feel in the lines of G.K. Chesterton, but now a great thing in the street seems any human nod, where move in strange democracy the million masks of God. We don't feel that, we feel all by ourselves. But we can get it back, this sensation of being absolutely one with the whole, and at the same time retain everything that we have won by the development of Western-style personality, the ego. So then, this model of the world, based on the idea that we are all subjects of the divine king, was, you might say, a political model based on the organization of the great city-states of the ancient Near East. And that image, you see, has absolutely haunted Western man throughout his whole development, because he has felt that he is in this universe on probation, on sufferance. He doesn't quite belong here, because there's this great big giant spirit who's saying to him, now you watch out. You're just a miserable little worm, and I evoked you here out of nothing. Of course I love you, because I am love. I'm a very good father, and everything that I do, however much it hurts, is for your good. But you watch out, and don't you dare look me in the eye. So everybody does this. See? All those customs where the ruler is faced this way, with head down, and so no looking at him directly, is based on this mythology. And of course it's based too on some political facts, because when a big man does attain to eminence, everybody is against him secretly. They hate him for it. So he has to be surrounded with guards and secret police. And people all lie with their faces on the floor, so that they're in a position where they can't attack. That's the whole idea. And that's why in the royal court, the throne has its back to the wall. There is nothing behind the throne. There are just guards on either side who can be watched a little. You see? So in a church, when the altar or the episcopal throne is right with its back to the wall, this really indicates the situation of fear.
Đêm buồn lặng lẽ, một mình tôi nhìn mưa rơi chợt thấy bồi hồi, thao thức đợi chờ người xưa đến. Có lẽ người ta trăng đen rồi ngậm ngùi nhìn cánh phượng vĩ rơi ve ngân dạ khúc thật bùi ngùi hà chưa kịp đi thu vội tới từ nay ta đã mất nhau rồi duyên hai ta đã hết rồi
It lies at the root of many of our best ideas of justice. But it bugged us. It really bugged us because you felt that
đêm
you
buồn
were
lặng
never,
lẽ
never free
một mình
from
tôi
the penetrating glance of an all-seeing
nhìn mưa
eye
rơi
that
chợt
dropped
thấy
everything
bồi
into
hồi thao thức
I have a friend who
đợi
is
chờ
a numerous Catholic,
người
and in her
xưa
toilet,
đến có lẽ người ta trăng đen rồi ngậm ngùi nhìn cánh phượng vĩ rơi ve ngân dạ khúc thật buồn ngùi hà chưa kịp đi thu vội tới từ nay ta đã mất nhau rồi duyên hai ta đã hết rồi
They couldn't stand it. They felt that this was the paradox involved. To believe in that kind of a God, a personal God.
Đêm buồn lặng lẽ một mình tôi nhìn mưa rơi chợt thấy bồi hồi thao thức đợi chờ người xưa đến có lẽ người ta trăng đen rồi ngậm ngùi nhìn cánh phượng vĩ rơi ve ngân dạ khúc thật bùi ngùi hà chưa kịp đi thu vội tới từ nay ta đã mất nhau rồi duyên hai ta đã hết rồi
And that we, sensitive, intelligent beings capable of love and all sorts of feelings, are an accident. A really deplorable accident. But what a monstrous system in which the tender, sensitive nervous systems that we are could appear in a world that consists principally of rock and fire. That is an impersonal, vast, gyrating nonsense which has no consideration for us men whatsoever. Now, why did such an idea possess the Western world? Why could it be that in the 19th century Freud could talk about the basic energies of the psyche as libido and compare them to the blind forces of brute emotions, you know? Think of that language. At the same time, Ernst Haeckel and T.H. Huxley and so on were thinking about the world as the manifestation of energy. Say, Henri Bergson with the idea of the élan vital. What was the nature of this energy which manifested everything? Essentially, it was something like electricity. Now, electricity, it does wonderful things for us, but essentially electricity is rather dumb. You switch it on and switch it off. Supposing I could just switch you on and switch you off, you see? But just like that, say, please don't bother me anymore. And you'd vanish. But that's the you see, they thought of the world as being just a surge of like this, you see, but completely stupid. Only after how on earth they ever got intelligence out of this is a miracle, but they did, by explaining that if you gave it enough time, it would eventually become intelligent. Well, that's the most nonsensical idea anybody ever thought of. That if just time, you see, would make things more complicated. Now, I want you to, this is the thing that is difficult today, because that idea of the mechanical universe, that is essentially dead, is a very persuasive one. And most intelligent people today who are products of the college and that particular system of propaganda and indoctrination, really feel that this is the case, that they are strangers in an alien world, and that when you die, it'll just be like you were a caterpillar that was squashed, and that will be that. That you're, in other words, an interlude of consciousness between eternal darknesses, and that's all there is. It doesn't mean anything. It is just that, and not much of that anyway. Not much of a that. Now, what is important is to understand that this is a myth. There aren't, just as the other thing about the great cosmic king is also a myth. There is no foundation for it in fact whatsoever. But it's a way, you see, of putting the world down when it had been put up too much. It's a reaction. The world had been put up too much by being made embarrassingly intelligent. You see, there was that all-seeing eye who was saying to you, da, 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 every minute, you see. Better a dead world than one watching me like that. Now let's look at certain elements in the 19th century myths, the Newtonian myths, that are very interesting. First of all, let's consider what it says about the nature of human consciousness, of the mind, of being aware. There really is no such thing as a mind. What we call mind and life is a kind of scum that grows after a long time on the top of rocks. You see, it looks upon the human being as a cell-infested skeleton, just as it looks upon the earth as a life-infested rock. It sees no real connection between the rock, which is the earth, or the fiery metallic ball, and the life that's creeping on its surface. That's an excrescence. Now, excrescence means something that grows out of. But look how we use the word, an excrescence. It's something. It sounds almost like excrement. We use it in a deprecatory way. And you've got to watch very much how people use words and the tone of voice they put into them, because that shows you what game they're playing. So when they say life is an excrescence, or they got another word they had at those times, an epiphenomenon, a mere epiphenomenon. Note the word mere. That word does more damage in philosophy than any other one I know. He's a product of nature. He's not the special creation of a supernatural God. But they didn't, as a result of feeling that man is a product of nature, become friendly with nature, as you would have supposed they might. They hated nature all the more, and all the more furiously, for bringing us forth, and therefore waged and initiated the war against nature that began with the 19th century and has been pressed into the 20th. The idea, in other words, that the only hope there is for the human spirit is to beat the environment into submission, because it's an alien environment. It's a hateful, mechanical, stupid bunch of nonsense. And if we don't get in there with our cleverness and power and smash it into submission, we have no future. We're just going to be wiped out one day when the sun gets too hot and blows up. And that'll be that. But before that happens, which will maybe 1 million years from now, we expect to inhabit other galaxies, to have the sun under control, all sorts of wires fixed into it and things, and so it'll behave itself. And then we'll rule the roost. Now, having examined then these two mythological forms which underlie the Western man's intense feeling of alienation and separateness, we have to go into another dimension of the question. And that is the influence upon who we think we are of our social institutions. We know that there are things like the family, marriage, the police, the courts, the law, the church, and we know that these are social institutions. But social institutions are far more subtle than those things. Time, for example, is a social institution because it is a matter of convention, that is to say, of coming together to agree to measure time in a certain way. And we have international agreement about that. Likewise, obviously, money is a social institution. So are weights and measures. So are ideas of value. What is the good life? Who is contributing to society and who is working against it? So you see, we were discussing this morning, among other things, the idea of survival. And that survival is a good thing. And to survive as long as possible is a very good thing. But that is a form of social institution. It is something we have come to agree about. It isn't necessarily true in the sense that, shall I say, the French language is not a truer language than the English. But so long as people agree to speak a certain language, they can communicate. And they've decided that communication is a good thing. So any language that makes communication possible is a good language. And in a way, the more people who agree about it, the better. But it is a matter of agreement. You see, same way, the lines of latitude and longitude are conventions. They don't exist. You can't tie up packages with the equator. But it's a very useful idea. And so in the same way, the ways in which we have shaped the constellations, that we all agree that the stars called the Big Dipper look something like a dipper. And though, you know, there aren't any strings tying them together, the constellation is not there as a constellation. So, in a sense, we project our institutions onto the world in rather the same way that psychiatric patients project images onto a Rorschach blot. And what interests the psychiatrist is what sort of images this person produces. That tells him something about the person. In the same way, our social institutions tell us something about people. When we see some very exquisite pattern, we look at it and say, my, isn't that wonderful? Isn't that intelligent looking? I wonder who did it. Because we associate all intelligence with a who. And when you look at a plant, it's obviously intelligent. Its shape,
Phải đâu ta
its rhythm,
muốn đâu ta
all its constant tunes inside, its complex
phong sương áo
relations
bạc tình ngân trắng
and light.
dài.
This is very intelligent.
Cuộc đời sao lắm phong ba,
Now, in just the same way,
chữ
we are
duyên lần
the
đận
external world.
ép a nửa đời tình yêu
It's amazingly
nghe
complicated.
mãi xa xôi.
Because the aspect of our consciousness with which we notice things is very limited. It notices what is called facts, things and events. And
Khi
it
đi
pulls them out as significant.
lúc đến như trời trốn tìm,
You see, when you remember coming here,
tôi đành mặc kệ con tim
you only remember
để cho
very
số
tiny bits.
phận tự tìm lấy nhau. Mình chẳng thích đi theo số thế, nhưng tại sao vẫn đến này? Chắc là mình đẹp thế này. Mọi người cứ nghĩ mình để có bồ, tôi mặc kệ đời số mình đây. Sống ép ấy mình cũng thấy cũng vui, gọi cần em phải những mùi ghen hơn cay đắng.
people regard space as nothing. It's just a void in which we move around. But actually, space is terribly important. It has properties. We are all something
Khi đi
in rather the
lúc
same way
đêm
that a
như
world
trời
full
trông
of
tìm,
space has
thôi đành mặc kệ con tim
it has ripples in it.
để
It
cho
has
số
places where it's denser than
phận
another
tự
place.
tìm lấy nhau.
And this is all
Mình
becoming
chẳng
clear.
thích đi theo xu thế,
But it's certainly not
nhưng
written
tại
from
sao vẫn
consciousness of the
đến
average
đến này?
intellectual.
Chắc là mình đẹp
There is
thế
no
này.
manifestation of
Mọi
energy without
người
space.
cứ nghĩ mình đây có bồ.
Also, we can drag in time, but I don't want to make it
Tôi mặc kệ
complicated. I want to make this little image
đời
as simple
số
as possible. Those who
mình
understand
đây
the importance of
sống
space,
hẹp ấy,
that is to say, of
mình
the
cũng
surroundings,
thấy
of the
cũng
background.
vui.
And the background
Gọi cần
is
em
ignored in
phải
ordinary
những
consciousness. But in
mùi
mystical consciousness, the background becomes important.
ghen hơn cay đắng.
You become aware vividly of the fact that you, as an individual, imply by your existence everything else that exists, or ever has existed, or ever will exist. You can't exist as the kind of person you are without all that. Now that's the secret to the connection between you and the cosmos. Just as a back doesn't exist without a front. In just that sort of way, all of it doesn't exist without you, and you don't exist without all of it. Even if you die, you see, and disappear totally, nevertheless, the fact that you have existed is still a fact. And a universe in which there has been a person like Socrates is quite a different universe from a universe in which there hadn't been a person like Socrates. Socrates, having existed, is a symptom of the way things are. So fundamentally, we get a picture of the cosmos in which the self, the real I, is the whole thing. Just as we say of an individual human body, you are John Doe, and that's all of you. Although if we look at you very carefully under an electron microscope, we will find that molecules in your blood are further apart than the Earth and the Sun. What makes you think you're a unity? It's quite a thought. Well, it's space. And so in the same way, as such a relationship exists between our galaxy and other galaxies and so on. It's obvious. So, then, by various conventions and social institutions, we develop the impression that this isn't so. We learn to ignore. We learn not to notice certain things. And do you know, not noticing is very, very important. In the Hindu theory of politics, what are spiritual virtues have political counterparts. For example, in the spiritual domain, the word upaya, U-P-A-Y-A, means merciful techniques for awakening people. Clever devices used by a teacher. In the political domain, the word upaya means cunning, deceit. Likewise, in the spiritual domain, upeksha means equanimity. In the political domain, upeksha means overlooking. When, for example, the boss of a big concern finds that one of his employees is taking out a little bit of the petty cash, now he figures out, is this man worth it? Are his services really worth it, and shall I merely ignore the fact that he's doing this? That would be upeksha. Now, in our whole society, we do an enormous amount of upeksha. The things we overlook. There are obvious things that we don't talk about. There's a taboo side to life that we don't mention. We're supposed to overlook it. You know, when silk stockings were first invented, with the fine mesh type, a present of several dozen of them was sent by an important American businessman to the Queen of Spain. And they were returned by her chamberlain with a letter which said, "You should recognize that Her Majesty the Queen of Spain has no legs." In other words, those legs don't officially exist. So, only what exists officially is what is noticed, and as we say, noted, noteworthy. Make a note of it in your mind, in your date book. Noting and noticing, notation, you see, they're all based on the same idea, what we attend to. But there are a lot of very attention-worthy things that we ignore. But part of the whole game, you see, of a cosmos is played in this way. Imagine the cosmos as a great harp. You know, the angels are supposed to play harps in heaven. Well, the actual harp they play is the total possibility of vibrations. Now, you know about the spectrum of light. That is a series of vibrations. So is the spectrum of sound. Then beyond light, there are other vibrations which are not picked up by our senses, but instruments pick them up. And then there must also be many vibrations as yet not picked up by any instruments that we have. Now, what is, you see, what we call nature is a system of picked up vibrations. Some vibrations aren't picked up, and therefore nothing appears. That's why it seems that there's space around things, because the vibrations there aren't picked up. They're not noticed. And this is why there is a whole domain of Hindu and Buddhist philosophy called Tantra. Tantra refers to the idea of weaving. And so when you have a warp and a woof, the weaver decides what threads are going to be picked up and appear on the front, which is what everybody's going to look at, and what threads will be overlooked, repressed, put behind the scenes. They'll be behind. And so it will appear that we have a birdie here and a birdie there and a birdie there, and no connection between the birdies. Actually, if you look on the other side, you will see that the red threads which made the birdies against the white background continues. Only that's not noticed. So in this way, we are taught from childhood. We are indoctrinated in a system of social institutions that are simply rules about what is to be noticed and what is not to be noticed. That's why children ask sometimes very odd questions about things that adults don't notice. The famous story of the little boy who's been taken to a concert where a lady is singing, and he says, "Mama, why does she scream when she yawns?" So, and in the same way, inventive poets put together images that people never thought of before. It's like Yeats's famous phrase, "the be-loud glade." You know, it was a beautiful idea for a nice glade to be be-loud. And everybody says, "Wow, think of that. We never thought of that before. We never thought of it just that way. We didn't notice that." And the question, the fundamental koan, as it would be called in Zen, is what is it you haven't noticed? What are you ignoring? What have you forgotten? You know, you've forgotten something. Very important. It's like you came in here, you know, without clothes on, in a sort of fit of absent-mindedness. I look at you and say, "Haven't you forgotten something?" You say, "What? Oh, good heavens." So in the same way, the fundamental who we are, the basic identity, the Brahman, the Tat, which Tvam Asi, that's what we've all forgotten. But by ignoring it, we make this game. So then, let's see what we do precisely in steps about social institutions in training the young. First of all, it's important to identify a child. The child has got to be someone. And we often say of a child we think is dumb and incompetent, you're never going to amount to anything. I like it when babies howl and get attention that way. But it gets attention because it's annoying, and we want to stop it. So we fundamentally want people to love us. And we don't believe that they will, unless somehow we put them in a situation where they must. So we have all kinds of processes for charming people and eliciting their love. They range, you see, from, first of all, on one end of the spectrum, from being physically attractive. That elicits attention. Another way is to be funny. And people laugh, and they like you having something around that's funny. Another way is to be helpful, to wash the dishes and things like that. And that's good. Another way is to be weird. Only that's a little disconcerting. You have to be careful how you play that one, or they may put you in a place where you're not seen. All the time you're playing this game, of course everybody else is reacting.
Em sinh như một bông hoa, ngát hương lan tỏa thiết tha tháng ngày. Dù xa, tình anh vẫn đắm say như bên nhau mãi vòng tay nồng nàn. Hoa em dù úa hay tàn, nụ hôn anh từ trên làn môi xinh, yêu em mãi mãi chung tình. Hương hoa vẫn quyện đôi mình với nhau. Đừng làm cho trái tim đau, đừng làm nỗi nhớ nát nhau tâm can. Tình yêu không đợi thời gian, yêu nhau có lúc lệ tràn đậm mi. Đừng bao giờ nói chia ly.
Further unpredictable. So for the same reason, we have a fairly large number of acceptable character roles that people are allowed to play. And you should watch these.
Em sinh như một bông hoa, ngát hương lan tỏa thiết tha tháng ngày. Dù xa, tình anh vẫn đắm say như bên nhau mãi vòng tay nồng nàn. Hoa em dù úa hay tàn, nụ hôn anh từ trên làn môi xinh, yêu em mãi mãi chung tình. Hương hoa vẫn quyện đôi mình với nhau. Đừng làm cho trái tim đau, đừng làm nỗi nhớ nát nhau tâm can. Tình yêu không đợi thời gian, yêu nhau có lúc lệ tràn đậm mi. Đừng bao giờ nói chia ly.
That is soon done in this way. A child notices very early in life that he's a different person in different environments. He is one person in the company of his parents, sometimes one person with his father and another with his mother.
Em sinh như một bông hoa, ngát hương lan tỏa thiết tha tháng ngày. Dù xa, tình anh vẫn đắm say như bên nhau mãi vòng tay nồng nàn. Hoa em dù úa hay tàn, nụ hôn anh từ trên làn môi xinh, yêu em mãi mãi chung tình. Hương hoa vẫn quyện đôi mình với nhau. Đừng làm cho trái tim đau, đừng làm nỗi nhớ nát nhau tâm can. Tình yêu không đợi thời gian, yêu nhau có lúc lệ tràn đậm mi. Đừng bao giờ nói chia ly.
You will discover that it's full of the echoes of other people's voices. What do I think about this? And you think, but actually it's your mother talking to you, or the sort of thing she would say, or whoever else it may be, someone you admire very much. So the interchange of our own behavior and the messages that come from the environment, and especially from other people, give us the message that identifies us. It tells us who we are. And in this culture, you see, the messages that we get from the social environment do not tell us very many things about ourselves. They do not tell us, above all, about the big secret, how we are connected with the cosmos, because that, in this weaving game, has been left out in the background. Now, I have spoken, obviously, of many of these social institutions in a way that will sound critical to you, as if they weren't as if some of them weren't really a very good idea. And we have to figure out ways of deciding about social institutions, whether they are good games or not. And that's quite difficult. When we contrast a Victorian family with a modern family, there are very different game rules are being played. And we have more or less decided today that they weren't playing very good game rules. If you contrast a book, for example, on child rearing, written in, say, 1860, with Dr. Spock. Well, Dr. Spock is post-Freud. And since Freud, ideas of child rearing have altered quite radically. And also one must not forget that Montessori and Froebel and all sorts of other people, and not to mention, what's his name, Summerhill, come in between. Now, on what grounds will we say that the game in which a child is now educated at a reasonably progressive school is better than the kind of school I went to, which was based on the fundamental game rule of this school is suffering builds character. And therefore you could mistreat somebody out of compassion, that it is good for him. Now you could say, well, I've had many arguments with my father about this. My father's a really genuine philosopher, and a man with a very open mind. But he said once, he said, think of any great man who ever came out of a co-educational school. You know, it's the sort of question that you've never thought of, and so you don't have any ready answers. But he was convinced, you see, that in a boy's life, association with women is weakening to the character. And that's why boys are sent away to be in the company of men. Get them out of those womanish ways and make them tough, you see. Now, if you're playing society by that sort of game rule, and you want men to be soldiers, and so they'll be happy with each other with no women around, and you want to be explorers and all that sort of thing, then you will say that kind of education produces good results. But you see, we're living in a world where soldiers are becoming obsolete. They're just becoming a menace and a danger. And we've got to be very careful that we only breed a few of them. Just like bees have these problems of how many of this type of worker and so on to breed. And we have this as a very serious problem, and it's changing rapidly. It's changing so rapidly that we're in considerable doubt as to what kind of human characters are advantageous to have. You see, there are circumstances in which people who simply conform and cooperate are a damn nuisance. Because they don't get any new ideas. And what we needed was new ideas, and we needed people with the courage of their convictions. There are other circumstances where we've got enough ideas, and people with new ideas just make things complicated. I have a psychiatrist I met recently on my travels said, I don't know if I'm going to come to your seminar. We'd had a conversation, got on rather amusingly. He said it would be a terrible, terrible problem to me to get any new ideas. He said I would have to reorganize my entire operation. And it's going along pretty smoothly now. And said I have a hospital and I have many men under me working, and we've got a system going. If you give me new ideas, it's going to be awful. So the basic thing then is we are given a choice of roles, and we are encouraged to be consistent in our roles through the novel and through drama and through all kinds of other means, so that people will be controllable, so that they won't be too jumpy. What is it that worries you about somebody who is insane? See, a friend of mine had a patient who, when he came into the outpatient department in the Veterans Hospital every day, would have to sign himself in. And on the roster where you signed yourself in, there was a place for your occupation. But he changed his occupation every day. And one day, when my friend received the card, that he signed as he comes in, he said, "Oh, I see you're the mailman today." And he said, "Yep, and I'm married to a mailbag." Well, think of the meanings in that. The trouble with certain schizophrenics is that they've got an association pattern going. They make the most devastating puns. And the people don't appreciate these puns because they're too deep. They don't follow them. The schizoid person gets worried because people don't appreciate it. And he sees how everything goes together and plays this language, and if people don't appreciate it, it leads to trouble. Well, it so happens that my friend is very sharp and loves that kind of message. And they got on very well together. He finally explained to him how to use languages, how to say the right things on the right occasion, because these nuts called sane people won't understand you if you make that pun. But therefore, remember at the same time, though, that the role you have over the years gradually acquired and are playing is a social institution. It isn't the real you. And in many cases, therapy in which a person, as a result of which a person feels that they've found themselves, means that they have exchanged an impossible game for a possible one. They haven't really found themselves. They haven't gone, or very rarely, gone behind the game. So you see, we like a game that teases us, that is comprehensible but not too comprehensible. And this suggests then that the world itself, the nature of the cosmos, is comprehensible but not too comprehensible. Even God, if you will imagine yourself in the situation of God, would be bored in knowing everything. So what does God do? God therefore plays hide and seek. Now you see it, now you don't. And that game is of the essence of being. It is the up and down motion of a wave. The crest of the wave is now you see it. The trough of the wave is now you don't. And the whole of existence is waves, is undulations, is vibrations. So, there it is. Now, but you can't say, as if to toss the thing off, well, it's just vibration. It's only vibration. It's mere vibration, because, wow, when that happens, it isn't mere. Because what this vibration thing is doing is saying, come on now, how far can we go this way? Whee! It goes way out that way. It says, all right, now how far can we go the other way without, falling apart? And then it goes way out like that. Then suddenly it falls apart because it's found out that by falling apart in this dimension, you can come into being in another. And there are endless ways of going. You can do it this way, that way, and you can think out dimensions that we've never thought of at all for our ordinary practical purposes. But always, you see, To be in this way implies not to be in another way, and not to be in that way implies to be in that way. So don't worry. The whole point of the thing is, however, now watch this, this is terribly important. The whole point of the thing is worked out so that nobody, even God, is going to be too sure. Because if the moment there is total certainty, there is no life. Being has ceased at the moment when it's all white and no black. It's all clear and nothing obscure. At that moment, you see, it stops. But what we call existence, life, all those things, is a pulsation which involves a constant uncertainty. It always involves the second philosophical question: are we going to make it? And there are people, you see, who, like philosophers and sages and whatnot, who say yes. Don't be afraid. You're going to make it. But it's always going to feel as if you won't. But that's the fun, you see. That's all. Children love to take risks. They like going roaring around in hot rods or on those skateboards and things like that. It's terribly dangerous. But that courting of danger is life. Tillich calling it the courage to be. So when we get older and we think, oh Lord, for heaven's sake, I just celebrated my 50th birthday, and I realize I've made it through half a century, and I can't make out whether I'm just getting older or getting wiser. I mean, I do think, for the nature has certain merciful processes in it, and that it, for example, for a person in extreme pain, the pain can be converted into ecstasy. The person who's starving can begin to feel way out. And same way as you get older,
đêm buồn lặng lẽ một mình tôi nhìn mưa rơi chợt thấy bồi hồi thao thức đợi chờ người xưa đến có lẽ người ta chẳng đến rồi ngậm ngùi nhìn cánh phượng vĩ rơi ve ngân dạ khúc thật bùi ngùi hà chưa kịp đi thu vội tới từ nay ta đã mất nhau rồi duyên hai ta đã hết rồi.
Do not confuse that with truth. It is simply a way, a fashion in philosophy. See, philosophy has fashion in exactly the same way.
Đêm buồn lặng lẽ một mình tôi nhìn mưa rơi chợt thấy bồi hồi thao thức đợi chờ người xưa đến có lẽ người ta chẳng đến rồi ngậm ngùi nhìn cánh phượng vĩ rơi ve ngân dạ khúc thật bùi ngùi hà chưa kịp đi thu vội tới từ nay ta đã mất nhau rồi duyên hai ta đã hết rồi.
Fine, that's fine to study that, and you'll come on with such a very way about it.
Đêm buồn lặng lẽ một mình tôi nhìn mưa rơi chợt thấy bồi hồi thao thức đợi chờ người xưa đến có lẽ người ta chẳng đến rồi ngậm ngùi nhìn cánh phượng vĩ rơi ve ngân dạ khúc thật bùi ngùi Hà chưa kịp đi thu vội tới. Từ nay ta đã mất nhau rồi, duyên nợ hai ta đã hết rồi.
Loving human beings should have to put on this act about being great. You see, what is it? Our men in this culture are possessed by looking like clergymen, and to go around wearing black and things like that, and it's terrible. Why not break out? Enjoy color, delight, and so on. Because people are afraid if they wear too many colors. Do you know what the real reason is? Somebody will shoot you. You can be seen. You don't disappear into the landscape. So, or the Lord will say, "Who do you think you are coming on like this? What's all this stuff about? Disappear. See, you annoy me. You're too colorful." But you don't. You won't be wiped out for that reason. There are plenty of other reasons nowadays, but not that one. So, it is important for us to recover from myths which constantly bug us, they constantly annoy inside, that you have to watch out. See? Of course, some corporations are arranged so that you do. You work across the street, IBM, they require you to look as ordinary as possible, because that would make them nervous if you didn't. Things that aren't ordinary can't be thought of in terms of punch cards. Everybody soon will go around wearing a notice on them: "Do not fold, spindle, or mutilate." So, then, what I want to summarize what I've been saying this morning, which is this: a peculiar culture, social culture, based on a fearful attitude to reality, makes each one of us feel that we don't belong. It's working on the idea of being scared as the basis of a culture. So that you could say, all our literature, our drama, our religion, our music is a complicated way of being scared. And we cannot really, not in our culture, there are cultures where they do, that we can't let go and stretch out our arms and breathe deeply and say, "Oh, for heaven's sake, I belong in it. The whole thing is me." Not me in the sense of Alan Watts, not quite like that, but all of you, that it's the whole thing goes together as one enormous organism that is living it up. That's what we call being alive, isn't it? And doing all these things around us. In this third session, let me start by briefly summarizing what has happened up to this point. We have been studying the ways in which our sense of existence, of personal identity, is influenced by social factors. And in the first session, I described the two great myths of the nature of man and the universe which have dominated Western society. The Judeo-Christian myth, first of all, of our existence as being the creation of a cosmic king who is the foundation of being, who is reality itself, but to whom we are related as a sovereign and judge and who therefore keeps us in a chronic state of guilt. This particular myth became so highly uncomfortable that it had to be abandoned by most intelligent people. And in the 18th and 19th centuries, they substituted for it another myth, which is the myth of a purely mechanical universe, which is unintelligent, unfeeling, unseeing, the total opposite of the one they had before, and in which we can live without being judged, but nevertheless with a fundamental sense of futility. This latter myth has become extremely plausible today, and it is, as far as I can make out, the thing that most people really believe in. So you can always test what people believe in by what they do. I'm highly suspicious of most Christians, because I don't think they believe it at all. They'd be screaming in the streets if they did. They'd be terribly earnest. They'd have the most hair-raising television programs on the fate and destiny of man if they took this thing seriously, but they don't. You see, what's happening in most of the churches is that the theological schools are very advanced, very liberal, but they feel they can't give their congregations yet what they think. And their clergy are apt, therefore, to be extremely frustrated people, always wondering in the back of their minds whether they ought to, in good conscience, maintain their jobs. But the plausible myth today is not the Christian myth or the Jewish myth. The plausible myth is this mechanistic universe, which I call the Newtonian myth. And what I wanted to get across to you in the first session was that that rather plausible and so-called realistic view of how things are is just as much a myth as anything else. It's a way, it's a formulating an attitude to life which has nothing really connected with the way things are at all. Then we went on in the second session to explore the influence of social institutions on our sense of identity. And I tried to show how social institutions involve the most fundamental ideas that we have, and that our ideas of time and space, of the nature of ourselves, and of the nature of the good life, and of the necessity for survival, are social institutions of exactly the same kind as the lines of latitude and longitude. Those are abstractions. They do not exist concretely, but they're extraordinarily useful ideas. Because it's only through, as it were, spreading networks and grids over the world in our imagination, by means of which we can measure things, that you and I can arrange to meet at the corner of Wilshire Boulevard and whatever the street is here, Vermont Avenue. It's interesting, in Buddhism, you find that all temples are guarded by very fierce-looking authoritative beings. They're not like modern authorities. They don't have the same kind of glumness. They are much more ecstatic in their fierceness. And these are called the Dharma Rajas. That means the kings of the rule. They are the guardians of the 10 directions of the universe. Buddhism and Hinduism have 10 directions, that is to say 8 points of the compass, plus, above, and below. And these very fierce creatures stand at all temple entrances. And they are essentially the cosmic traffic cops, because they have to be fierce, because somebody has to lay down the law that we do recognize north, south, east, and west in a very firm way. And up has to be clearly distinguished from down, you see? So these people have a very important function. But at the same time, the Dharma Rajas have a slight twinkle in the eye, for all their fierceness. They know, you see, that the 10 directions are conventional. They don't think that they are absolutely real. They are enlightened, all of them. They're all bodhisattvas in the aspect of a bodhisattva which is wrathful. I suppose I haven't looked closely enough, but if you look around these paintings, you will find here, for example, is a wrathful bodhisattva, the sort of person who would be a guardian of the directions. Up here, there's this bodhisattva, and this one. They're beneficent. They appear in white color, and they have serene faces. But this one appears in black color and has a wrathful face. This is not a devil or demon in the Western sense of the word at all. He's simply a manifestation of the fierce side of reality. Some people don't feel really alive unless they're sitting on a spike. That tells them they're there. I went to Mexico this summer to explore this, because in Mexico they enjoy bullfighting, and they enjoy a kind of Catholicism in which suffering is the big bit. We went to the shrine of Guadalupe and watched young girls walking about half a mile on their knees to get into the shrine and for the special blessing. And then you find in the stores where they sell bondieuserie, that is to say religious goods, all kinds of horrendous paintings of Christ with a crown of thorns on. And we made some very special meditations in the Cathedral of Oaxaca, in the inner chapel where they keep the sacrament. And in there is a crucifix that's just about as bloody as it can get. And on either side, pictures of Jesus being flogged on one side and of the agony in the Garden of Gethsemane on the other. And I was trying to penetrate, what is this thing? Why do people go into this kind of spiritual matter?
Phải đâu ta, muốn đâu ta, phong sương áo bạc, tình ngân trắng dài. Cuộc đời sao lắm phong ba, chữ duyên lần đận ép ai nửa đời tình yêu, nghe mãi xa xôi. Khi đi lúc đến như chơi trốn tìm, thôi đành mặc kệ con tim, để cho số phận tự tìm lấy nhau. Mình chẳng thích đi theo xu thế, nhưng tại sao vẫn đến này? Chắc là mình đẹp thế này. Mọi người cứ nghĩ mình đây có bồ, tôi mặc kệ đời số mình đây. Sống ép ấy mình cũng thấy cũng vui, khỏi cần em phải những mùi ghen hơn cay đắng.
Annual course have been selected to be significant. But if you were a super astrologer, you should put in all the galaxies, or as many of them as you're aware of.
Khi đi lúc đến như chơi trốn tìm, thôi đành mặc kệ con tim, để cho số phận tự tìm lấy nhau. Mình chẳng thích đi theo xu thế, nhưng tại sao vẫn đến này? Chắc là mình đẹp thế này. Mọi người cứ nghĩ mình đây có bồ, tôi mặc kệ đời số mình đây. Sống ép ấy mình cũng thấy cũng vui. Gọi cần em phải những mùi ghen hơn cay đắng.
They always ask you where and when were you born. For some reason or other, this establishes your age, this establishes your nationality, or something like that. And so that's a social institution. It's been agreed on as a peculiarly significant moment. But all moments, fundamentally, are just as significant as the moment of birth. You have a birthday every day, if you understand it aright. So, there is a tacit conspiracy in society to ignore the fact that the body is inside the mind or the soul, and that you're therefore playing the game of being a creature separate from everything else, all alone, locked up inside a bag of skin, and worrying like all get out whether you're going to make it, and being frustrated by the ultimate knowledge that you're not. That we all, because we are time binders, we know we're going to die, and that we'll eventually collapse, and that we'll get colder and colder and colder, and it will be most unpleasant, and then we'll fade out. But because we've got our minds turned inside out, you see, we've got our identity, our center of gravity in the wrong spot, then this worries us a great deal. But with that worry, we do all kinds of magic. If people didn't worry about dying, there would be no medicine. The whole craft of the physician and the surgeon and all the skills and marvelous things that it involves is based on worry about death. There are children born occasionally who can't be boxed into the scheme. And very often the so-called Mongolian idiot, or a child who is schizophrenic for some reason from birth, can't be made to be afraid of death. And some of those children just are playing everything for all it's worth. They see a light on a reflecting surface like that, and they dig that light. They go, you know, and everybody says, now come to yourself, behave. They don't care. If they come to an end, that'll be great too. They'll be fascinated with that experience. It doesn't matter what it is. They have no discrimination. They'll eat anything, put anything up their noses. They have absolutely no sense of what you should do and what you shouldn't do. The trouble is, you see, that if they had an understanding of the game that the rest of us are playing, they could get on very well, knowing their different game, and put the two together. And that's what I'm talking to you about. The trouble with them is that they don't understand our game. But that's the trouble with them from our point of view. Do you see that all decisions as to who is crazy are a question of majority vote as to what is reality? And that sometimes it's touch and go. You see, look, reality is what it is according to the kind of senses you have. Since in this room almost everybody's eyes are of the same structure, we are here and we agree. Everybody's ears and auditory nervous systems are of the same pattern, so we can all converse. Now, if a fly comes into our presence, he has an eye of a very different structure from ours. A fly, apparently, because of the multiplicity of lenses, sees the surrounding world from a considerably different number of points of view. they're not very different, but they're just subtly different. And that gives the fly certain advantages. But he doesn't see the world as, if I see you there, sitting there, he sees you ever so many times. But he manages to unify that in some way. Now, the awkward matter for decision is when a human being has a different kind of consciousness from the average, to make the decision, is he advanced and seeing new things that nobody has seen before, or is he retarded and hasn't yet developed what the rest of us have? This is a very difficult decision to make. Genius is to madness close allied. But you've always got to one thing that our culture is a little bit defective about, as compared, say, with the culture of the Arabs or the Hindus. We are not sufficiently respectful of crazy people. So, well, more or less what has happened is this. In the development of games, there was a time when human beings were wild. And that's what we call, in modern anthropological jargon, they lived in hunting cultures. They didn't live in any fixed place, and they roved, and they hunted. They killed other creatures to live. Now, in a hunting culture, every male member of the culture knows all of the culture. They don't have a division of labor. Every man is a master of quite a number of skills, and naturally every woman knows all her side of the thing. But they're not fixed. The religion of a hunting culture is shamanism. Now, a shaman is a liberated man who gets his liberation by going into the forests alone. The Indian cultures of the United States, especially in the West, are to a very large extent cultures of this kind. And their religion is a form of shamanism, and shamanism is a universal religion, spreads over the whole world. Mircea Eliade has written a marvelous book on shamanism. But the essential thing of the shaman is that he becomes liberated from even this loose sort of a culture by going off by himself. And naturally, the highly socialized people have a terror of solitude, because in solitude the awesome facts are slowly going to appear. First of all, the triviality of your role game, and then deeper and deeper in you get, until at last, one night, all alone and cold under the stars, you find out who you are. That's what every shaman does. And then he comes back into the world in those kind of societies as a magic man. But when human societies become agrarian and become settled, they divide labor, and they put a stockade around themselves at the crossing of two roads. All cities are fundamentally that, where two roads cross, and the cross is encircled with a pale. Pale, palo, tree, trunks spiked on top. And you say of somebody who isn't really at all nice that he's beyond the pale. You see, so we settled that way. And then what we did was we divided the functions of labor into the four quarters encircled about a city. And we made four castes. The first was priests, lords spiritual. The second was officials, soldiers and rulers, lords temporal. The third was merchants. and or the commoners. So the House of Commons in England is really a merchants' debating society. And finally, in the, as it were, the lesser of the quarters, the laborers, the workers. These are the four castes of Hinduism: the priests, Brahmana; the officials, Kshatriya; the merchants, Vaishya; and the laborers, Shudra. And so the holy man of an enclosed society of this kind is a priest, and he gets his authority not from going off by himself, but from a hierarchy. Now then, that's the game that we are still playing, only we've modified it enormously. We're not living any longer in walled cities, but we have different kinds of walls. We have the dew line, the radar belts, and all that kind of thing. It's still essentially the same game, but it's been spread out in the most extraordinary way. And we have become so absorbed in this game that we don't have quite the same sense that our primitive ancestors had of there being an outside to the game. Because you see, there are two kinds of people beyond the pale. There are the people we throw out, and there are the people who go out. The outlaw who's a criminal is fighting one sort of game. The outlaw who is a saint is beyond the pale in the sense that people can't understand him. His experience is ineffable. That means what can't be effed or spoken. From the Greek pheme. So notice then this curious companionship between the saint and the no good. They've always been associated. And it's a very odd thing. Jesus, as we know, sought out as his friends the disreputable people in the community. The whores and people who are now called notorious evil livers. I say not now, but they were. In the prayer book of the Episcopal Church, there is a passage about notorious evil livers who should not be admitted to communion. But you see, the funny, odd, queer thing is that it is precisely the notorious evil livers that people like Jesus cultivated. Because they were interesting. Because there is something in people like that that is manurish, feisty, that somehow cultivates a new thing. As the book of the Revelation says, because thou art neither hot nor cold, but lukewarm, I will spew thee out of my mouth. You cannot pretend that you don't have the dark side in you. Everybody has a shadow. And if you won't acknowledge your shadow, you'll push it onto someone else. For example, often we find that people who are sexually repressed, and as I say, sex being the taboo in our culture was the problem thing, are very cruel. But here is the game involved, but it's an unconscious game. If you make sex the chief taboo of the culture, You make it terribly important. I've said that Christianity is the religion about sex. I mean, we think there are sexual religions like Priapism, which is phallic worship, or Tantric Yoga, which uses sexual intercourse as a form of meditation. But compared with Christianity, these are things only mildly interested in sex. Christians are utterly obsessed with sex. And today, the function of the churches is primarily to be family and sexual regulation organizations. That's about the only thing they do. Seriously, and the test of it is, what can you be kicked out for? You can embezzle funds, you can be a drunk, you could be anything. But the moment you make a sexual mistake, out you go. That's what's scandalous. So, what do you mean by being immoral? What has come to your mind when you say somebody's immoral? Does it mean that he cheats and forges checks? It sure doesn't. What do you mean by living in sin? Does that mean that you're conducting a butchery?
Em sinh như một bông hoa, ngát hương lan tỏa thiết tha tháng ngày. Dù xa tình anh vẫn đắm say, như bên nhau mãi vòng tay nồng nàn. Hoa em dù úa hay tàn, nụ hôn anh gửi trên làn môi xinh. Yêu em mãi mãi chung tình, hương hoa vẫn quyện đôi mình với nhau. Đừng làm cho trái tim đau, đừng làm nỗi nhớ nát nhạt tâm can. Tình yêu không đợi thời gian, yêu nhau có lúc lệ tràn đậm bi, đừng bao giờ nói chia ly.
So this poses to anybody who becomes aware of this, this poses to everybody who's drunk with psychoanalysis or anything like that. The question that St. Paul raises in the Epistle to Rome. St. Paul explains.
Em sinh như một bông hoa, ngát hương lan tỏa thiết tha tháng ngày. Dù xa tình anh vẫn đắm say, như bên nhau mãi vòng tay nồng nàn. Hoa em dù úa hay tàn, nụ hôn anh gửi trên làn môi xinh. Yêu em mãi mãi chung tình, hương hoa vẫn quyện đôi mình với nhau. Đừng làm cho trái tim đau, đừng làm nỗi nhớ nát nhau tâm can. Tình yêu không đợi thời gian, yêu nhau có lúc lệ tràn đậm bi, đừng bao giờ nói chia ly.
For being the process of being saved. Now, in that case, then, you will notice that human history has
Em
done a
sinh như
very
một
strange
bông
thing.
hoa, ngát hương lan tỏa thiết tha tháng ngày. Dù xa tình anh vẫn đắm say, như bên nhau mãi vòng tay nồng nàn. Hoa em dù úa hay tàn, nụ hôn anh gửi trên làn môi xinh. Yêu em mãi mãi chung tình, hương hoa vẫn quyện đôi mình với nhau. Đừng làm cho trái tim đau, đừng làm nỗi nhớ nát nhau tâm can. Tình yêu không đợi thời gian, yêu nhau có lúc lệ tràn đậm bi, đừng bao giờ nói chia ly.
For thousands and thousands of years. But suddenly, with the Industrial Revolution, the whole human race goes like this. The population suddenly starts expanding at an unprecedented pace, and power is blowing out of us in all directions. Something quite different has happened. And the speed of social change, in other words, the rhythms of everyday life, are completely changed. Now, bees and ants have kept their life rhythms going for probably millions of years, without any change at all. They are very successful societies, and they are what you might call non-historical societies. They have no history, because they have a completely settled life, and in the same way, when human beings have a completely settled agrarian life, they do not record their histories. There is nothing to record. It's the same day after day. Are we, as someone has suggested, I forget his name, he wrote a book called Post-Historical Man, are we about to enter a non-historical stage? Spengler thought that we were going to turn into what he calls a fellaheen culture, where we're an enormous milling mob of fundamentally people who are just getting by, and eventually we are taken over by various beneficent despotisms which run us like an anthill, and that this may go on for hundreds and hundreds of years. Or what is far more likely, are we going faster and faster and faster towards the point of blow-up, in which we turn into a star? Well, now, it is said in the Hindu cosmology myth that as the Kali Yuga progresses, it becomes easier and easier for anyone to be liberated. Right at the beginning of the manifestation, liberation was amazingly difficult. And the reason was that life was too good. It was so pleasurable and delightful that nobody wanted to leave it. Obviously not. Because if the fundamental game is one of hide and seek, and therefore the initial phase of the game is to get lost, then in that case nobody wants to wake up, because the Godhead doesn't want to wake up. Not yet. But then, as you see, you get bored with being merely happy, and you start getting adventurous. You get involved in more and more far-out situations in which you goose yourself, you thrill yourself with the idea of being out of control. Let go, let go. So therefore, you see, again, by studying our own energy patterns, we begin to understand what's going on in general. So in the same way, you might say that in the game of hide and seek, the hiding, the abandonment of control gets more and more far out. But it goes along simultaneously with an attempt to control things more and more. Now, you remember how I described the two-way nature of a tree pattern, from the roots to the twigs, but also from the twigs to the roots. Well then, it is said by very deep Hindu metaphysicians that the pralaya and the manvantara, the manifestation and the interval between manifestations, are really simultaneous. If you're truly enlightened, you see that time itself is an illusion. There is in fundamental reality no succession. There is only the appearance of succession, as when you observe a Rorschach blot under the influence of LSD. It looks as if the blot is flowing into position. It is moving. You can see the paint or the ink or whatever is on it going, but it's always standing still and it's moving at the same time. So that's the situation we have. Eternity and time together. It's always there, but it looks as if it were changing. But it keeps changing into the same thing, hence the French proverb, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. The more it changes, the more it's the same thing. It keeps turning into itself. So the counter-movement is this, that at the end of the cycle, things get more and more out of control. And everybody, every individual, has the sense of powerlessness, that the government is out of hand, that nobody is put up for election whom we care to vote for, that the whole thing is a mess, and that you can't do anything about it, and the wars which we don't want get more and more imminent and dangerous. Yet at the same time, we are trying to control everything, and so government gets more and more uptight, and at the same time, since we are coming to the end of the cycle in which the divinity wakes up from the dream, more and more people are beginning to have mystical experience. That is the waking up process. But then, in all this, there is the kind of terror, you see, of waking up. Because that is a way of experiencing one's own hush to oneself. That is to say, when you want to play hide and get lost and imagine that you are all this, and that is your firm intention, so much so that it produces the vivid reality of all this going on, you are repressing who you really are, what you really are. And that repression, when uncovered, is experienced in the form of terror at finding out. Don't look into the secret box. See? There's always something. There's always a forbidden area. There's always something behind the scenes with a sign that says, keep out. You mustn't find out what goes on in there. And so, naturally, the suspicion in which the mystics have always been held is that they disobeyed the keep out sign. They looked under the carpet. They peeked through the bathroom keyhole. They found out what was going on behind the scenes. The mystic is a peeping Tom. Yes, obviously from the point of view of the management, because the management keeps the show going. The show must go on. You must be responsible. The mail must be delivered. People must be fed. Babies must be looked after. Of course. The show must go on. And therefore any suggestion that this is completely unnecessary will be regarded as utterly subversive. And of course it is subversive. Because it turns the carpet upside down, that's all. So then you get this really frightening picture that as we move ineluctably towards the final colossal explosion, we all begin waking up, and we begin to see in our visionary experience the great white light. Well, what do you suppose that is? Why, that's the star you're going to turn into. The light of glory. God in the form of the sun. The greatest and most ancient symbol, even used by Christians, is when God is called the Sun, S-U-N, of justice, and is born and in the form of Christ at the winter solstice, which is the period of the birth of the sun, because it is when the sun is at the lowest point in the midheaven and is starting to rise again towards the summer solstice. Now just let's suppose, I mean, I've been telling you a fairy tale, a science fiction sort of thing. Let's say we're getting into a new thing called metaphysical fiction. And let us see that if that is the possibility, and what is actually happening, what will be our attitude towards it practically? We can react in horror and say, oh no, not that. Of course, it happens in nature all the time. Tribes of insects or animals of various kinds, lemmings, methodically annihilate themselves. They commit group suicide. So we can object to it very strongly. But the curious thing is that the harder we object to it, the faster it happens. All warmongers are pacifists. And therefore they call their war department the Department of Defense. They're always fighting for peace. And for justice or some good cause. So it is highly possible then that if we accept that this is the state of affairs, and we do not do anything to try to prevent ourselves from blowing ourselves up, that this could very possibly have a slowing down effect on the whole process. What happens, you see, is that the system does blow itself up through expansion of its control over itself. So therefore, the more you have the powerful fascistic type government, whether it masquerade under the name of communism or capitalism or whatever, it's all the same thing. The government is invariably the most successful group of gangsters. So when it gets very, very tough and strong, you can see then that the world is getting uptight. And as any system whatsoever gets uptight, it begins to vibrate too fast. It's the same principle as the thermostat. If you get the thermostat uptight, that simply means that you have put your on switch point and your off switch point too close to each other. It is a mechanical analogy of anxiety. And to be uptight, you see, is to be anxious. And so the colossal paranoia and anxiety that spreads through the world today on all sides, engendering vast secret services, espionage systems, espionages on espionages, and police looking after policemen, and all that kind of thing, is what is going to blow it all up. Because it's all being done in the name of security. You know, the security officer. There is no security. There never was. And everything that is done to ensure it is a source of trouble. Like insurance. Read Ambrose Bierce, The Devil's Dictionary, the section on insurance. So then, the only thing that might be done is really to do nothing. To start relaxing. Saying, well, if rape is inevitable, enjoy it. By doing this, we would considerably slow down our own demise. In other words, one says to the people who want power, you want power? Take it. You bore yourself. You tie yourself up in knots trying to arrange everything. And I think that under such circumstances we would find there would be a considerable solution of problems. You know, it's like the riots. If the police weren't there, they wouldn't have happened. It was by anxiety to keep everything under control that you started a riot. Now, I'm not saying that I know the details of how to work this out, but I am saying that if that is the direction in which things go, you cannot oppose it. There's no point in opposing it. You could, by understanding that you have to go with it, you could tack against it and slow it up. But we do know that life is always a process which tends towards death. It tends to run down. Things fall apart. They wear out. Even though the biological organism is different from the geological. The geological simply disintegrates slowly. The biological tends to work against entropy. But it still always comes apart in the end. And therefore, we have to see that maybe one lives by accepting death just as one flies by an understanding of gravity. Using judo, there may be a way of using judo against gravity to throw ourselves up into the air. How do you suppose a salmon jumps upstream? It isn't just a matter of muscle. It's quite certainly, I think, a question also of the angle of the tail to the falling water. It's like a dolphin can set its tail at a certain angle to the wave made by the bow of a ship and can skitter along the water riding on that wave. It's a big surf job. So then, if for any reason whatsoever or in any design whatsoever life is a system that is always deteriorating, sure, it may be going up like this, you see, but it always drops. And after it's gone like this and this and this and this for a certain cycle, it's going to go like this and this and this and this and this and this and this, probably getting a bell curve or something in the end. So, the moral of all this is really that the current fear, paranoia, mistrust of everyone and everything is itself the process of destruction. If you can get it into your heads that, well, it just doesn't matter. Survival is not the important thing, because you're not going to survive. This will do two things. One, it will eliminate an enormous amount of hostility and, as it were, trigger happy fingerness. Two, it will liberate an enormous amount of our energy from defensive, security, military projects to things that are more economically useful, like the provision of food. You cannot, you see, be even a good soldier until you have reached a certain stage of development where it makes no difference whether you live or die. This was always part of the training of the samurai, that before he could really learn the use of the sword under a skillful master, he had to get to the point where he wasn't constantly anxious to defend himself, because that put his body into a certain kind of tension which rendered him incompetent. He had totally to overcome the fear of death. That was the first requisite. And you can overcome the fear of death only by realizing that it's completely inevitable, that everybody here is as good as dead, under sentence of death. Only because you don't know when it's going to happen, it isn't such a grim affair as somebody in death row, although it's just as certain. And just as they hire lawyers to put it off, you carry on business and generally delay your demise. The thing that makes the death row peculiarly awful is that it's also deliberate, and nothing is more torturing to a human being than to be a complete social outcast, who are despised by everybody else. He has a real reason to feel paranoid. But otherwise, we are all just as much under sentence of death. And there simply is no point in straining to prevent this happening. That doesn't mean that you cease to take care in driving a car or to be sure that you don't eat poison and so forth. But it means get off the strain, the general uptightness about preventing one's own demise, and you'll live long. It doesn't seem logical, but I think I've demonstrated that it is. For you see, it is through the acceptance of death that you become suddenly charged with life. But I say, if you give up the impossible task, you have all the energy that you've been using to strain against the inevitable to do something great, so that you become alive in the degree that you accept death. This is true of the individual, and it can be equally true of society. That as society realizes that, well, we cannot hold the form of our nation, the form of our civilization, the form